Great.
Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will from Starheart Astrology, and I am here today with Jaime Wright, and we are going to give you your Leo season forecast. Jaime Wright is a wonderful friend that I met over Instagram, which is where I met most of my astrology friends. And so I'm super excited to have her here. She is a masterful astrologer. She's a performance artist, all around creative Saturnian, Neptunian queen. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So so I hosted Michaela last month. You guys seem to like that. So, I'm gonna keep doing these. If you are an astrologer and you want to come on and do a forecast with me, let me know and we'll do it. Okay, so we are going to jump right into Leo season in kind of our pre-forecast chat. We were talking about how Leo season is kind of a come down a little bit from Cancer season, which had some choppy waters in it, and Gemini season, which was absolutely bonkers. So that being said, we still for most of 2021 have this Saturn Uranus square active. So that has been, this creative splicing of the old and the new is kind of where I am with it right now. How are you doing? How are you thinking of it? How has your thinking changed in the first 6 months or even arguably a year of this Saturn Uranus square?
Totally. It's interesting, like going into this year in like every client session and for myself, I was talking a lot about how that Saturn Uranus is all about sustainability and finding structures for the change. And I was like, and it's, on a world level and then on a personal level. But what was interesting about like the Leo season hit of it is I really realized that I think I was thinking of the Saturn Uranus as like kind of on the personal level of like, oh, this is affecting like my little life in these tiny ways. But actually when the Mars and Venus were squaring Saturn and Uranus, I was like, oh, like this Saturn Uranus is actually more like the greater, longer narrative that I'm just a part of. And like, I actually really need to figure out where my desires and my instincts and my wants fit into that. And like, it's like Saturn and Aquarius is like not actually close enough to me for it to be about like my pure desires. It's like this, if that makes sense. Like I'm really realizing like how big and how structural it all is. If that, yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I've in the past year, I've been really thinking about Saturn and Aquarius being kind of this theme of decentering ourselves. It's like you still have to participate, but you're in this wide angle lens where you're like not necessarily in the forefront. And so it's really about like how do you figure out what your role is going to be. And I think the gift of Aquarius is that you don't have to be Leo. Like you don't have to be the hero of the story.
Totally.
Right? We need all the extras in the background, otherwise it looks weird. Like totally. You are allowed to have like these like private projects in the revolution of the world that are still like extremely meaningful, even if they're not center stage.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also realizing that like the Saturn Uranus square is really active this year, and like that's sort of whatever sustainability and structure I'm working on in my life is like, again, like also this greater, like the entire time Saturn is in Aquarius project of like, oh, this is the year that it's the most acute and obvious of what's going on, but I still have to keep working on this for years to come. So,
and right, with Uranus in Taurus as well for years to come.
Even longer.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so this, I think the pandemic kind of gave us the context for like how do you come back into life? How are we adjusting back into it? How, you know, I think even just the past month of climate related craziness, extreme weather, which is part of the pattern of Saturn and Uranus too. If you look back to the last time we had this waning square, in 1976 and 1977, it snowed for the only time in recorded history in Miami. And at the same time, Alaska had its warmest winter up to that point in recorded history. The Mississippi River froze all the way down to Illinois. There was like all this crazy weather. A whole bunch of dams blew out because of extreme flooding. We saw that in Europe. So the extreme weather seems to be part of it, but I think it's really like putting into stark relief, our relationship to the natural world, which I feel like Uranus and Taurus is kind of like, we have to address this.
Totally. I mean, especially when you think about the last time Uranus and Taurus was literally the Dust Bowl. And it's like, are we going back, like with how hot it's been this summer, it's like, are we going back into the Dust Bowl? Like what, you know, it's like first came the fires and the floods. But I do think like the Saturn in Aquarius in a way, even though it is so at odds with Uranus and Taurus, it's at odds. It's like the Saturn and Jupiter and Aquarius transit is the first time Uranus we've really seen like this is how other big planets play in like a hard aspect way with that Uranus. And it's like, what can we actually do about it? How can we actually fix it? Or like create a new world that makes sense when everything we can like touch and feel is changing.
Right. Or like, like what is meaningful in our participation when all of it is beyond our control? And by that, I don't mean like that we can't do anything about it, but we like individually, we can't solve it, right? Like it's already in motion. And so we get these other questions get raised about like, okay, how do we, how do we address it in our lives? How do we start thinking of it? What do we owe to the collective? I think is a big question.
Totally. Yeah.
So in Leo season this year, we just had that square. It went exact in Gemini season. It got activated in Cancer season by Venus and Mars going through the beginning of Leo. They are both at the very end. Venus went into Virgo on Wednesday, the 21st. And Mars is heading out also. But we have the Sun and Mercury coming in Leo season to activate it. And so, right, there's that's kind of the main drama, I think, of this season. No. Think you probably agree.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting because as I was saying, like right before we were recording, it's like for some reason it doesn't feel as dramatic as Venus and Mars squaring both Saturn and Uranus. And it's like partially because the Saturn-Uranus square is no longer as exact as it was in Cancer season, because we had just had the exact hit of their square on the 14th, I think, of June. And now they're like a little bit separated. So it's not like in the beginning of July when it was like one day after another that we were getting the hits. But it's like sort of like if those like Venus and Mars are so much more like what we're putting out into the world. And not that this obviously the sun is what we're putting out into the world, but I feel like this is a little bit more like the mindset shifting and like the thinking shifting and like the being shifting, as opposed to like, well, literally Mars being like the most aggressive and dramatic. And even Venus and Leo being like, I want to connect. and Mars being like, I'm going to get it. And the Sun and Mercury squaring that Saturn Uranus, I feel like, is much more like, okay, it's almost like we should have done it the opposite way, where it's like we were going after something, but our mindset was not there. We were in sweet Cancer season, just trying to have like a sweet, nostalgic, fun time. And that's where like our brain was, but our heart was, going for the jugular almost. And now maybe our mindset is catching up.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're just, right. I mean, Mercury is nimble in the way that it, right. I think we'll probably see a lot more language around it. Like it almost seemed like right in Cancer season, people were experiencing it and they weren't talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get some like more reflective stuff of like, this is what we need to change, and like, this is where I got it wrong, and now I can be the hero of the story to change the world. That's funny. I was just the other day sparing the whole backstory of this. Yeah. We were arriving home from a bunch of travel and getting a bunch of stuff from, inheriting a bunch of stuff from my grandparents. And we're talking about like, okay, we're going to get home. How are we going to unload all of the stuff from the trailer? And my partner saying like, sometimes I read on Reddit that like when things are really hard, just think of yourself as a superhero instead of focusing on how difficult they are. That sounds like so much of like, okay, so Saturn is squaring Uranus, like the climate is being destroyed, the social fabric is fraying. You can sit there and think about it, or you can pretend to be a superhero.
Yeah.
We're in Leo season.
Totally. Totally.
So that's what we got. We also, the standout feature of this is that we have 2 Aquarius full moons, and Jamie is a natal Aquarius full moon. I hope that's okay that I just said that out loud.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's one of the reasons that I asked her to be here for this, because we have 2 versions. And so, yeah, we've got one at the very beginning of the sign, one at the very end, which we would need to have in order to have 2 in 1 month. So it's almost like, I've been thinking about this in terms of, we get twin culminations of the Aquarius new moon. But I know you are much more versed in the decans than I am, and we can even talk about, we can get into them. And maybe we should start with that, because
maybe we should. I was saying we should dive in.
The sun go into Leo, and then we have an Aquarius full moon the next day.
Yeah. And I was thinking about how it's like, of course, Leo season is starting off with this like high drama, but like a full moon immediately. But it's also like high drama that's been somewhat muted because one, Venus has just gone into Virgo. So it's like everything's a little bit more subdued. I mean, even though Venus in Virgo I think doesn't get the credit for being kind of like kinky and fun in the way that placement really is. And it's also like a full moon, but it's the full moon in the like, don't look at me sign, but it's like, look at me, but don't. But that full moon it's at 1 degree Aquarius, I think. And so it's in the first decan, and the first decan of Aquarius, I know Austin Coppock calls it the mark of exile. And I think of it as like, it's because, and my moon is also in the first decan of Aquarius. So I think about this often, and it's the decan that's ruled by Venus. So there is something that's very like, artistic and soft about that decan of Aquarius, but it really is like, I'm kind of the like freak of the family and I'm leaving. Like it's like I'm this moon, but where I find comfort is not here. And I need to go off on my own journey and go into my own world. And I think of it really as like, but it's taking the first step of that journey. So it's not when you're like, it's like not exactly the like kind of Uranian, like, oh, I'm just gonna like go do it. It's like you've made the decision and you're going, and you haven't had time to get like lonely or freaked out yet. You're just like, I'm alone, I'm ready to experiment, and I'm having the time of my life. And I was like looking at the chart of this full moon and thinking about that decan. I'm like, especially because we have these 2 full moons in Aquarius, and the second one is all the way at the end of the sign. It's like we're sort of getting to like, we're getting like the beginning of the experiment, and then later in the month the end of the experiment. But then it's sort of like what counts is what you do in the middle. And I think like this full moon is really ripe to just be like, throw it on the wall, put it all out there. Like it's very like let your freak flag fly energy. I think. But it's also like, let your freak flag fly, do all of that, but it's like, let your freak flag fly in a way that really truly is authentic, and not just to do something subversive. Because the more authentic it is, the more you're gonna like have the middle that gets you to like a good end, and not an end where you're gonna have to scrap the whole project.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like, right, you know, I mean, Leo as a sign is so wed to feedback and audience. Mm-hmm. And an Aquarius full moon is like, you just did the performance and then there's just like silence. Mm-hmm. Like Aquarius is like, so that was you. And we're not going to comment on it because we just want you to be you. And totally. Like, so it's kind of like full moon of like, okay, you exist in this like Aquarian participation place, but your existence there should not be about the feedback that you get. And so like, here's a view of you. It's just like a cold Aquarian mirror. Leo sun.
Totally.
You.
Totally. And it's like, yeah, it's like
Leo season. Do you want to change? Do you want to change anything?
Yeah, like we're holding up this mirror and you don't have to clap, but like this is just what it is. And this is related. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent about this, but I recently rewatched the movie Thelma and Louise, which I don't know if you're familiar. It's like, basically, without like going over the whole plot of the movie, it's like these 2 women from small town Arkansas like go on a trip and like end up killing someone, and the whole thing is them being like criminals on the lam. And it's like these 2, and it's like a buddy comedy. But Thelma, who's like the real goody 2-shoes of the 2 when they first start out, is played by Gina Davis, who I know has her son in that first decan of Aquarius. And if you look up her biography, she has kind of a mark of exile kind of story too, where she like separated from her whole family. But in the movie, it's like they kill this guy and they have to become criminals. And Louise, who's played by Susan Sarandon, is much more of like the tough girl. And she's the one who actually commits the murder. If you haven't seen the movie, it came out 30 years ago. So these are the spoilers. But it's still good. But throughout the movie, Gina Davis's character Thelma like becomes obsessed with the life of crime, and she's like, I'm not going back to my old life, like this is my life. And she starts like she like goes and holds up like a gas station. She puts a police officer in the trunk of his car. Like she becomes this criminal mastermind. And she's like, this is how she was in like this very sort of abusive marriage before, where she was belittled and not allowed to do anything. And now she's like out on the road on the lam and having the time of her life. And not that this full moon is like about and going and like going to live a life of crime, but there's something where it's like, I feel like there's something where you almost like surprise yourself with like what you really want. And then you just have to go for it almost in that part of Aquarius. And in Aquarius in general.
Yeah. And I think, right, like that brings up this kind of this, the polarity of Aquarius, which is like, it can be extremely controlling and also like create its own logic for like why being an outlaw is really important. Right. Like, yeah, Tom Robbins also had, I don't know when his rising sign was. I don't know that we have that, but he had Saturn in the first decan of Aquarius and wrote a book about like exalting the outlaw, but very much his like whole ethos is about this like renegade Aquarianness. Totally. And then but his Mercury was in Leo, so in this very exalted Leonine way as well.
Totally. He's writing about it with this like Leonine bravado.
Right. And Aquarius would never write about itself in that way because that would be too grandiose.
Totally.
So now we've set the stage. You're the hero, but don't be too grandiose because it's really about your authenticity, but don't get too celebratory about it.
Totally. And this full moon, I was also thinking, is interesting because it's so close to where the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction was too. Right. So we're seeing like maybe seeds of that story like starting to blossom in a way.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's kind of interesting because the Aquarius new moon happened at 23 degrees. So in contrast, it's much closer to the second one. So I guess if you wanted to divide them up, right, we could say that this is in some ways like a pinpoint on the great conjunction that happened in December of Saturn and Jupiter both going into Aquarius and conjoining at 0 degrees. And then the second full moon that we have at the end of the month be the culmination from the Aquarius new moon. Okay, so we start off with that. And I always like to kind of write, the full moons are the emotional peak of the month. So there is this like, as Jamie's saying, kind of this like high drama at the beginning and the end. We're gonna kind of like slump down into Leo land in the middle for the Leo new moon.
Yeah, and I feel like in that thing of like the authenticity and the authenticity of the high drama, it's like we're sloping down into that Leo new moon, but it's almost like be careful not to lose yourself in like obviously it's Leo season, but lose yourself in like the Leo-ness of like your own bravado, your own wants and needs, your own sort of glory.
Right.
Which I think it's like almost like you can be like, oh, I got it. I had the idea. I know how to save the world, but actually I also need, I'm going to maybe fall back on a like performance of that instead of actually doing it.
For sure, right? I mean, you can lose yourself in the archetype that you're trying to inhabit. And then find yourself, right? Like that's the paradox of Leo, is that like, I'm going to fulfill this role perfectly, but the role has been set by stuff outside of you, right? Whereas Aquarius is much more like, I'm going to be myself, and that's going to create this weird role that nobody's ever heard of or thought of before.
Totally.
So we have that full moon. Then we've got a kind of, then we've got a few Mercury days in terms of, we've got Mercury towards the end of Cancer, runs into a trine with Neptune and an opposition with Pluto. And then, then early in the week on the 27th goes into Leo. So there's almost, right, like we've got this full moon, but Mercury's in Cancer. You don't have a mouthpiece to perform with.
Right. We've got this full moon, and then Mercury kind of goes into this, like the trine Neptune is such this sort of like creative, dreamy. Like, I feel like whenever I experience that, like Mercury trine Neptune, I like will get just like a nice idea to like write something or collage something, and it all just sort of flows out. Especially when it's like the Cancer Mercury as opposed to the Scorpio Mercury trine Neptune, which is more like dig deep into the past diary. Yeah, and then having that, like all these like Cancer planets opposing Pluto have been, I feel like, a bit gnarly. Like we're pulling the secrets out from under the rock, and maybe this one is a little bit like some of that stuff is like shared more. But I do feel like those two like Mercury Cancer aspects, like on the 24th and 25th, are very like kind of digging into it's like we're getting the last little bits of that Cancer season nostalgia vibe, emo vibe, then like maybe obsessive vibe.
And it almost kind of like, right, like Neptune and Pluto are so diffusive, it almost like it takes it out of our hands. Like, okay, you have all of this memory and you have all this tragedy in your family history and with your mom, and so does everybody else, and so just drop it until next Cancer season.
Right. Right. It's almost like, so what are you going to do about it? And then on and then it's like the 26th is maybe like still thinking about all that. And then on the 27th, Mercury goes into Leo, and it's like none of that ever happened. It's like, we're just going to sweep on, exactly, like as you just said, like sweep it under the rug until next year.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk about it.
And then like Mercury enters stage left onto the stage. Like, are you going to be crying about that stuff back in the wings?
Yeah.
No.
No.
So, and then right after that, we get Jupiter the next day retrograding back into Aquarius and closing out that little kiddie pool of Pisces that it was dipping its toes into for the last 2.5 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how you've been feeling about the Jupiter and Pisces. I feel like, you know, so many people when Jupiter was going into Pisces, everyone was like, this is going to be the best part of the year. It's going to be so great. Like, it's going to be like a sweet relief. Like every astrologer of every caliber, like if someone was just like, give us some hope for 2021, like what year is it? 2021. They were like May through July, Jupiter and Pisces. But I feel like the overall like performance review of Jupiter and Pisces has been like, it's like kind of sucked, but I feel like it's mostly just like Jupiter's like getting comfortable. Like, I don't know, I have it in the 6th, which is obviously not a fun house, but I feel like it has revealed every kind of health issue that I kind of have so that I can fix it. But it hasn't been fun to have every health issue that I could possibly have sort of revealed to me. But it's sort of like, I'm doing this, I'm not hiding this from you anymore, so you can take care of it. You can feel it.
You can feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's certainly at least been mixed. You know, I even had a client who had Jupiter in the 5th, so it should have been like really fun house. But we've had Jupiter in Aquarius and Capricorn for the last 2 years. And so part of that transit for this client was them realizing that they don't know how to have fun anymore. And almost like this grief transit. And so and I think for me, and I just kind of made this connection after a conversation that you and I had last month. Every time in my adult life, so it's only been twice, that Jupiter has gone through Saturnian signs, I struggle with atheism and I struggle with having faith. And, right, and I can't see how much pain that's causing me until Jupiter goes into Pisces. And kind of being like, oh, I need this like faith to come back because it just feels cold.
Totally.
So I was like, okay, we're going back there. Okay.
Yeah, it's like the vulnerability of like believing kind of hurts a little bit.
Yeah, and right with Jupiter going back into Aquarius, it's like, right? So maybe what we're saying is this dip into Pisces was us like seeing all of the stuff that we haven't had the capacity for whatever reason to be able to acknowledge or see. We've been like feeling the weight of those transits like actually sink in through the Pisces. Like it gave it like a medium for us to feel it.
Totally.
And now it's going back into Aquarius. And in some ways, I feel like that could be a little bit of a rough transition because now we're more aware of what it feels like for it to be in Aquarius.
Totally. It is like, and we skipped over this, but it's like we have the little blip on the 22nd of like Venus opposing Jupiter at 0 degrees. And it's like the last moment where the two benefics are like off axis from all the fixed sign drama that's going on. And even though it's Venus and Virgo, it's like Venus is still getting like a lot of dignity by reception from Jupiter. And I feel like it's this nice little like, it's like, that's like a really sort of like, that's almost like maybe this whole Jupiter and Pisces transit has been a little bit like, vulnerability is hard. And that's gonna be like, oh, this is fun. Okay. Now we're going back to like philosopher Jupiter. Who's
philosopher like, Jupiter.
Philosopher skeptic Jupiter. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the one thing that I'm curious to see how it plays out is that it will be like, because Jupiter was moving so fast in the beginning of the year that like so much of that transit, it was really, really close to Saturn. And it's like going back into the same house as Saturn, but they're gonna be like over 15 degrees apart, I think, for most of the time. So I'm wondering if that will like, because I felt like when Jupiter was in Aquarius in the beginning of the year, I'm like, I can't even tell what's Jupiter and what's Saturn, because it all feels like, it just feels like Saturn multiplied. And I wonder if maybe we'll get a little bit of a taste of that. Like, I mean, it's still skeptical philosopher Jupiter, but a little bit more expansion in that area, a little bit more like actual buoyancy. I don't know.
Yeah, actual good upgrades on our stuff. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. And then, right, it's going to be close to the second Aquarius full moon. So, right, that's another kind of feature is that
totally
it's louder.
Yeah, we're going to get it like totally lit up.
Yep. And then right after that, so we just go like, it's just like the scene change happens so fast. We've got Mercury into Leo, and then the next day we have Jupiter into Aquarius, and then the next day we have Mars into Virgo. So it's just like, it's like everybody gets a different role really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when you go to like a summer stock production and all the same actors are in 2 different plays and they just switch plays basically. That's like this is literally astrology summer stock happening. Yeah.
Right. And you can like, you kind of believe it, but then when you're like thinking about it later and you're trying to figure it out, you realize you're confusing their roles. Anyway.
Totally.
It's just like, it's like a whole different story, I think is what you're saying, like starts.
And it has like bits of the previous story, but there's different characters. Yeah.
Right. And now Virgo's in it, like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm just going to figure it out. And so, yeah, Mars moving into Virgo. I'm always so intrigued with Mars and Virgo because I kind of picture it in my mind as like the master craft person. But it's such a, I feel like as far as Mars go, at least in my experience of it, it's such a docile placement for Mars.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it,
like, okay, now everything that you like, you have to pay attention to the details, and it all has to be meaningful, and it all has to be efficient. So Mars gets kind of buried in the details, and it's not the high drama Leo Mars.
no, I do feel like, I sometimes say that I feel like Mars is like secretly dignified in Virgo, though I hear what you're saying that it is very docile and not very like itself. He's not himself in Virgo, but he is like very good at what he does. Like I feel like it's a really good project manager. Like I always want someone with Mars and Virgo like working on a project with me because I know that it will happen. Like no matter what, something will get done and there won't be like complaining about it in the way that like even I feel like Mars in Aries and Mars in Scorpio sometimes, and Mars in Capricorn especially, are like, it's not that Mars and Capricorn complains or any of them complain, but they like sometimes they're like, look at my effort, I'm showing you my effort. But Mars and Virgo is very strategy oriented, project managey.
Yeah. Can be micromanagey a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, to what you're saying, right? So Mars's exaltation is in Capricorn, and there's almost like in Capricorn, they do nothing, 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 and then they have the stamina to just like do everything at once. And so it's like, okay, but you're still waiting on their time, whereas Mars and Virgo is like, you know, more concerned with the efficiency.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, as you said, like getting all the details in place.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, right, that's changing the tone too, because as we're having the Sun and Mercury approach these, the opposition with Saturn and the squares with Uranus, the like action and desire pieces of Mars and Venus are in a much more kind of, let's figure it out, what's really practical, what's really accomplishable, achievable.
Totally. And it sort of goes along with the fact that like that Mars goes into Virgo like right after opposing Jupiter while still in Leo, which is like I just feel like that aspect is sort of like blowing things. It's just like really going all out and exerting like an extreme amount of energy. And then Mars and Virgo is like, okay, you like, as you like ran the marathon, you like, it's not even a marathon, it's like you did that sprint relay race thing. you proved you could do something, but now we need to like train. Yeah.
I was thinking of like, you know, how when people were still crossing the Atlantic in ships primarily, they would have issues of like people getting super drunk and then being kidnapped and waking up on the ship. And now it's like, now you are a deckhand for this journey across the ocean, right? Because like Mars opposite Jupiter is like this huge crescendo of like, you got blackout drunk. And then Mars and Virgo is like, and it turns out like, now you're on a ship and like you have to do daily chores all the way across the ocean back.
Totally. The one thing I want to say, this is like slightly off, but I just wanted to mention this with Mars opposite Jupiter, is that the thing that sort of concerns me about it with like the weather, I was looking at previous Mars opposite Jupiter, like what days those were. And one of them was literally like the day before Hurricane Sandy hit New York. There was a Mars Jupiter opposition. And I was seeing some other ones that like sort of corresponded with extreme weather events. Like there was one in the summer of 2010 when there were like wildfires in Russia and floods in Pakistan all summer. And there was just like a lot of extreme, like there's just, it makes me, it's like, I worry that there's going to be some sort of like extreme weather event that then coincides with like Mars and Virgo also being like, okay, we need to strategize and like clean this up and like
literally clean it up.
Yeah, because like thinking about the Hurricane Sandy example too, like that was also, I think Mars was in Sag and Jupiter was in Gemini. So that's a very different like mutable chaos vibe. But that was also, it was like they shut down New York City, which like never happens. And I was like reading like the Wikipedia of Hurricane Sandy today to like refresh, even though I was like living here when it happened. And it was like, oh yeah, they shut it down like days in advance and they shut down all the trains and they went to all these extreme measures. It's even what you're talking about with like, they stole the boat. They exerted all this energy. They did the most. And then sort of like the storm comes in. So I feel like it's almost like beyond just it being like extreme or like extreme weather, it's like extreme preparation and exertion of energy in that moment too.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's in preparation, if that's what's happening.
Totally. I mean, I think the weather has already been so crazy that who knows, but
yeah, I think it's just buckling up. I mean, we still have an exact Saturn Uranus square. I was thinking about it. The New York City blackout in the late 1970s also happened during the Saturn Uranus square. I actually wrote an article, I'm not sure when it's coming out, but for the Ingress, which is the journal of NCGR in New York, about literally the power grid and what is happening with Saturn Uranus and Saturn Uranus in history through all of the different ways it affected the power grid. But that was one of them, was like, anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah, we'll see. So then after every personal planet changes signs in the first week of Leo season, with the full moon.
Oh my God. Craziness.
Yeah. We get a good formulation of the problems that maybe weren't so clear because we were blinded by the drama of Mars and Venus in Leo. So then let's see. Then what we go into, we've got kind of a few days of things being just a little bit more quiet. We have a nice like brief respite period, like a day of the moon in Taurus, or a day and a half before on the 1st, we have Mercury conjoining the Sun and opposing Saturn at the same time. So to kind of break that down a little bit, we've got a Mercury Sun Conjunction, which is the cazimi, but Mercury is direct. So it's kind of the midpoint between retrogrades. And it's also the point when Mercury is moving the fastest. So in Leo season, we will see Mercury in Cancer, Mercury in Leo, and Mercury in Virgo. So we get a lot of different flavors of Mercury. So we're kind of at that midpoint, but then also we have, Mercury together with the Sun in that moment of clarity staring down Saturn.
I'm interested about like what that will bring. I was thinking about this. I'm like, Mercury and Saturn in that moment have like reception with each other by triplicity in a way where Mercury does better in Aquarius and what am I talking about? Yes, because like I don't know what I'm talking about. I think I'm like Neptune. They have like I feel like it could be worse in that they have this like triplicity reception where like they're being a little bit, they're getting like that sort of solar daytime enhancement almost. And so I almost feel like in other situations, I would be like, what I'm trying to say is Mercury would be like more frustrated by that opposition with Saturn, but I'm almost feel like this is more of like an empowering like moment for Mercury.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it seems like both the Sun and Mercury do better confronting Saturn together because, right, like, you know, the Sun can use Mercury as kind of the translator for it, and Mercury doesn't get caught up, I think, in, as you're saying, in like the frustration of confronting Saturn, because the Sun has this kind of sense of the biggest picture and the higher ideals, and there's almost this way in which like it can be really grounding, and there can be remember last spring, a lot of my students, and I think I attract fairly Saturnian people to be my students, but it just became like, you know, we would be looking at these Saturn transits coming up, and again what would come up is that they were very clarifying through commitment. It's very much like they would come up against something, and then it was like, oh, because I feel limited in this situation, I have to choose what I really care about. And so I think it's right, like, you know, Saturn being like, you can be anything, but you can't be everything. So what do you want to be?
Totally. Like, and it's sort of like a very like grow up, Leo. Like you can be this like strong leader, but like mean what you say kind of energy.
Like that was directly aimed at me. My Saturn in Aquarius and Mercury and Leo.
True. The truth.
What a lesson. Yeah, because then the next day we have the Sun in opposition with Saturn. So, right, we've got like this, you know, we've got this confronting limitation weekend. Fun.
Yeah. But then like the Sun opposing Saturn too, it's sort of like, you know, those are well-matched opponents in this way where, you know, obviously the Sun in Leo doesn't like anyone to be like messing with the shine, but has respect for that Saturn in Aquarius, I think.
Yeah. Right. And I think Saturn in Aquarius too has the, you know, I think a lot about, right, like the Sun is the gravitational center, and Saturn in Aquarius is the containment of the boundary. And you know, Saturn really doesn't do well as the gravitational center, and the Sun's not supposed to hold the boundary. And so, right, they can respect each other in the roles that they're playing. And I think, you know, for us, we can have that respect too, that like we need to fulfill a role, and also there are limitations to what we can do.
Totally. Which is interesting because it's like we sort of get that real like go forth, young one, do your good work energy, and then Mercury and the Sun immediately then have their square to Uranus, which is a little bit like hot take energy. Like, actually, I'm just gonna do whatever I feel like doing right now moment. And maybe like I'm gonna lose a little bit of that dignity that I just gained. Or I'm being like Mercury. I think Mercury square Uranus is kind of like fun, like it's funny, like it's very like jokey energy. And Uranus is like overcoming both of them too. So they're kind of like under the spell. They're not in control really of where the hot take is taking them.
Right. It's like, okay, I found the path. Like I understand what I'm doing in the context of everything. Like, thank you, Saturn. I'm committed to the way. And then it's like driving down the road and then like, oh my God, I'm hungry. Hard left at Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
Saturn is like, on, you guys. What?
But which I guess like maybe another way of framing it is like also kind of like taking yourself seriously, but also having a sense of humor about yourself, and also being like, yeah, I do have this responsibility. We all have this responsibility to like restructuring and rebuilding the world, but also like it also requires that kind of like spark of Uranian brilliance that isn't always the most responsible, or isn't always the most like, isn't what we're supposed to do. But maybe that's like, it's okay as long as it's not going to, as long as you're not totally forgetting about Saturn.
Yeah, I mean, Saturn and Uranus will remind you later.
Yeah.
We're all going to show up to Scorpio season haggard and bleeding, and they will.
Well, Scorpio season is kind of when we get our next review of this. And this is like the time when we're actually at like, where like the personal stuff is at its most bold and most confident, at least in a like external way. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're finding our roles in the story right now, and then we're going to check in about the shadow of those roles, and we're going to have eclipses and like the whole thing, right? We're going to go through a dark night of the soul, basically, but we're like headed out into our hero's journey right now. We have not reached that point. So, so then we've got Mercury square Uranus on the 3rd, the Sun squares Uranus on the 6th. So the kind of dismantling of that space. We've got that very sweet, tiny, Venus trines Uranus on the 3rd, which I feel like kind of holds the space for like, this is all going to be workable. Because I think, right, and Earth signs, and especially in Virgo, it's like, okay, here we go. I'm going to help you lay the trap so that Mercury doesn't get too obsessed with Saturn. And then we have those squares. And then, right, that weekend, we have our Leo new moon.
Oh, yeah. And I guess that's interesting, too, that that sort of Saturn Uranus stuff is happening during, like, I think it's like all like the last quarter balsamic moon phase too. So maybe a little bit of that too is like getting some of it out of our system. Yeah. Yeah,
getting the Uranian pieces out. Or also, you know, right, like, yeah, okay, that's the plan, but it's the balsamic moon and I'm really tired. So I'm actually just going to take a 2-week break and then I'll get back to it.
Yeah. I'll call you at the next full moon. Thanks.
Getting prepared over here.
Yeah.
So then we've got this new moon in Leo, dead center in the middle of Leo. And there's not too many, you know, besides the Sun square Uranus, there's not too many aspects that are really too involved.
Yeah, I was looking at that. There's nothing, and it's sort of, I mean, it's got like Mercury with it and opposite Saturn. It's sort of just reinforcing kind of those transits from the previous week.
It's just like, it's the integration of like, okay, a new moon in Leo, like what is your role? What are you trying to do? And right, like that seems like really appropriate questions to be asking after the aspects of the previous week.
Totally. It's funny, the like, what is your role thing is making me think of this week on Instagram. I saw this like infographic that I think was from like the Sunrise Movement or one of those other environmental agencies or like grassroots organizations. And it was like, what's your role going to be in the Green New Deal? And it was like a personality test of like, I'm a performer, I'm like an architect, I'm a builder. And it was like, it felt like it was like Myers-Briggs for like grassroots futurist environmentalism. And I was like, okay. And it was very like, pick your role in the new reality. And I was reading through them and I was like, oh, I guess I'm the analyst. But then I was like, no, I'm the performer. And I was like, whoever did this made all of these a little too similar, but it did feel very like, it's like sort of what you're saying is like making me think of like, I think there is this sort of trend of like, pick your character for the new reality in the post-pandemic COVID world. You can take on you need to pick a player to go into this video game, this new simulation that we're entering. Yeah.
Right. Which Leo is trying to do, but like that just makes me so frustrated as an Aquarius to be like, you don't even know what it's going to be. You don't know. Stop.
Totally. But it's like you always need like the confidence of Leo to actually like embody, emit light, literally.
I'm going to be a community grief counselor to move us on from the old world.
Totally.
That sounds great. Everyone join me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got that new moon, and then, right, it's off axis, so not part of it, but we have a Venus-Neptune opposition, and it just feels so sad. Virgo opposite Neptune and Pisces sounds like not the like grief of Cancer, but the like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, Pisces being this like holy longing, and Virgo like, like taking the baby steps to get there. It's like, wow, this is a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it is like a very melancholic aspect, though. Like literally on like the sheet, what I impulsively wrote was dropping acid for science, because it feels like having a crazy experience for research purposes kind of energy.
I think if you're gonna drop acid for science, like this is probably not a bad election for it. It's a new moon, so you can really dip into the unconscious, but you're like not in the middle of eclipses. Like it's not haunted, right? It's like, and right, it's like the next day you've got Mercury opposite Jupiter, so like your mind gets blown.
Yeah.
You like think you're doing it for science, but like actually it lands really well.
Yeah. Well, I feel like both that Venus opposite Neptune, even though it is Venus in Virgo with Mercury opposite Jupiter, is kind of like a fun, creative, expressive kind of energy is going to be around. Like, I feel like that could make that kind of like pick your playerness of that new moon in Leo be like, yeah, I'm getting off to a great start. I'm dropping acid for science. I'm sharing about it on Instagram. I'm telling everyone. I'm telling long stories to my friends. Mercury Jupiter aspects, speaking of two people right here who both have those in our chart, but it's like you have so many ideas and nowhere to put them. You're like, where do I put them? So I think that could be kind of fun, but it's like, as you're saying, like there is something that's a little depressing about Venus opposite Neptune. I feel like if you don't have something to kind of vibe out on, then it is not that you have to drop acid, but if you don't have something to just enjoy, it might feel more like a lack or a dissociative kind of energy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right, in contrast to dropping acid, which would maybe be like the more Neptunian, Piscean part of that, it could be, like the meditative quality of getting lost in like a really mundane task.
Totally.
Sort your button drawer.
Right.
for a few hours while you listen to astrology forecasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's taking us out of ourselves, taking our desires a little bit less personally. And then right after that, on the 11th, we have Mercury go into Virgo.
Yeah.
Yay, Mercury in Virgo.
Which is I feel like very exciting.
Very exciting. Someone, please tell us what's going on. Mercury in Virgo, here to tell you what's going on.
Yeah. I feel like that's because that's the moment where then Venus and Mars, like their boss, like joins them and gains a ton of dignity. And so there's like, that's maybe like we're really honing in on the like strategize, project manage, figure stuff out.
But I also feel like, Mercury and Virgo can figure it out, but doesn't need to be domineering in how it happens.
Yeah.
It's like, right? Like it's your boss, but it's your boss who's like super creative, full of energy, always has ideas. It's like, here's what, doesn't need to be Saturn or the sun, doesn't need to dominate the plan.
Right. But then it also just has like really good taste, really good like quality control, knows how to like choose kind of energy. And it is like applying, like Mercury is applying to Mars. So there is maybe a little bit more like Martian energy kind of influence. Like it's maybe a little bit sharper, but as we were talking about, it's like Mars and Virgo is not like is just is like the camp counselor who's like really wants you to keep the bunk clean. It's not like this army general in the way that Mars and Capricorn is. Yeah, I feel like that's gonna be like a relief when Mercury goes into Virgo.
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost like the relief of just like being productive. Instead of being caught up in this like choose your role for the image, for the sense of your own epicness. It's like, okay, we're actually going to accomplish a few things while this is happening.
Totally.
And enjoy it and use it, because when Mercury is going to spend a bunch of time in Libra this year. So Mercury in Virgo.
I know it's gonna be a really quick little trip.
Yeah, and it was really quick. I mean, I was trying to even count the days, but it's really like, 2 weeks that it spends in Leo, because it's moving so quickly. And then it's into Virgo. And then we've got, let's see, what else do we have?
I think the next thing is Venus into Libra.
Yeah.
15th, which I'm really excited about too. It's the nicest Venus in Libra in years, because it's no longer going to be square Saturn when it's immediately entering the sign. And last year it was square Saturn and opposite Mars. So it was really in dire. Like there was no fun Venus in Libra last year.
Right. Yeah, and we needed it, and it wasn't there. That's kind of the story of last year.
Yeah.
Jupiter was in Capricorn.
Yeah, Venus had one moment, like at the 29th degree, it was no longer like in the throes of the malefics. And it was like, great, this is useless now. It's going to go into Scorpio.
Yeah.
But it's like going to apply to a nice trine to Saturn, which I think is going to be like really just, I think it's going to bring out the like really the like nicer side of Saturn in Aquarius that we haven't really felt in a while in these past couple months while we've been getting all the square activation. Like now it's maybe like, let's see how we can like use this air energy, like use our minds, use our taste, use our like Libran and Aquarian powers to like
for social harmony, for social justice, actually care about what it feels like to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And Libra, yeah, I think Venus can translate that really well. And Libra being the sign of Saturn's exaltation, right? They can just have a gentler conversation. And she can do some funny mediation work, right? Because Venus is the ruler of Uranus too, not in good aspect to Uranus, not in traditional aspect to Uranus, but still kind of like, okay, guys, let's
Totally.
let me just read all of your text messages to each other before you send them. I'm going to do that.
Totally. And I feel like this Venus in Libra trine Saturn is like a really nice, like as this is building, it's like a really nice aspect of just like building relationships that will last. As like in this like sort of like the new reality that we're in, it's like really connecting. To use the word authentic again, like because it's like Venus and Leo is just like, I'm so happy to be out again and see people again, and I'm just gonna dance on the bar. And then Venus and Virgo is like, ooh, got a diary about dancing on the bar for the next few weeks.
And I'm gonna clean up the bar. I'm gonna clean that up.
Yeah, and now Venus in Libra is much more like, I know how to do this, and yeah, I'm kind of like
sitting at the bar, like I'll have a classic Vesper martini.
Yeah.
Look very demure, be very appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think, yeah, I'm looking forward those transits. I mean, we're going to have the sun in Leo with Mercury and Virgo and Venus in Libra, like some nice dignity going on.
Yeah, some nice dignity.
That's not like some nice dignity that's not at odds with each other. Like everything in 2020.
Right. Was. Not a pissing contest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get that Mercury conjunct Mars on the 18th.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which just, I don't know. We've got a waxing moon. It feels very motivational.
Mm-hmm.
To me. I was like, okay, just do it. Just figure out how you're gonna do it. And like here's the plan. And we're not like being exhausted by Saturn, and we're not being disrupted by Uranus quite as much, although they'll run into Uranus shortly after, but it's in a trine. So, right, I feel like that's just like an energetic boost. But like Mercury and Mars are figuring it out, right? So there's this kind of like, it's like one moment where we like come together and people are figuring it out.
Totally.
Of a plan.
Yeah, I feel like Mercury Mars conjunctions are sometimes talked about like, oh, it's like really, you know, sharp words, you're like really forward or aggressive even. But I mean, in Virgo, as I was talking about before, it's much more like just like getting the job done, like saying what needs to be said.
Right. And Mercury is in control of this situation. So for a Mercury Mars conjunction, this one is like leaning heavily towards Mercury.
Right.
Like Mars is the servant, Mercury is the master in this one.
Right. Mars is literally just adding volume to whatever the message is, essentially.
Yeah, the workhorse.
Mm-hmm.
My child is making dinosaur noises outside the door. I don't know if you can hear him. He has a Mercury Mars square. I don't know what's being communicated here.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, we are almost to the end, but we have Uranus stationing retrograde in the middle of Taurus on the same day that the sun opposes Jupiter.
Wow. Yeah. The sun opposing Jupiter, I was like, it's funny how, I mean, this is just like the way that the way this works, but it's like Jupiter is always retrograde when it opposes the sun. And it's like Jupiter is like the only other, is like sort of the like the planet that's like most likely to overpower the sun and like add gas and add fire and add heat and maybe like steal the show, but of course is like retrograde whenever they face off because the sun always has to be in control. But thinking about this aspect in everything else, I mean, it's almost like not as climactic as it could be because it's like the sun in Leo opposing Jupiter in Aquarius, and it's a little bit like but maybe it's a little bit of that, like, you know, the main character and the philosopher skeptic have to, like, the hero and the skeptic have to like work together a little bit on the situation, see eye to eye, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like the hero confronting the masses that don't care in some way, or as you're saying, like the skeptical, right? It's like hope versus like the cold Aquarian, like March 4th of time, which with Jupiter, it's more supportive. But it's like, right, like you think you're the hero and then suddenly it turns out you're in the ensemble cast.
Right.
Wrestling, right? Like with that, you know, it's happening at the very end of Leo season. So but before the second full moon, in the same signs, right? It's kind of like, okay, you've been through the whole hero's journey of Leo. What does that mean for who you are now before we have this full moon?
Right. And then with Uranus stationing retrograde, it's also like experiencing like all the ways things are like changing, shaking things up, like, you know, the earth is literally shaking, and that retrograde station is like, okay, the change is maybe gonna like slow down, move back a little bit. It's not gonna be going at such a heavy pace. And it's like, we know, it's like, not that we no longer have that Uranian energy like propelling things, but the Uranian energy is sort of taking, you know, is like doing a review session. So then how are we like still moving forward without like the literal earthquakes like tumbling us against time? Yeah.
It's like this like checkpoint things.
And now it's like all the outer planets are retrograde now. Right. I was thinking about how it's interesting in the way all the outer planets are like sort of contained in a certain section of the zodiac. It's like they all go retrograde in the summer. So it really does become this like summer break from like the big issues, like really pushing forward. And it happens all at the same time. That's just like an observation that's like a larger conversation, but there's something where it's like, okay, it's all just like the personal planets that are really plowing forward and doing the work now.
And then that will move into the fall. We move into the fall, things get real again. Not that they're not real, but big things start, big mechanisms start happening. So then, right on the very last day of Leo season, right before the sun goes into Virgo, right before the moon goes into Pisces, with a nifty Mars-Uranus trine, right, co-occurring, we have our second Aquarius full moon.
And it's at like 29 and like 40 something minutes, or it's like really late, I think. It's like
29:37.
It's like a brush away from Pisces. what's interesting, so that's in the third decan of Aquarius, which Austin Coppock calls that one the knot, like Knot. And he describes it as like there's like a Gordian knot that like you've like worked something up into this like tangle, and your choice is either to sit there and untangle it or just to cut it and be like, it's done. And I feel like that third decan of Aquarius is like, I mean, that's where I have Mercury, and I think a lot about it's like, it does feel like a tangle sometimes. Like it's like many tabs are open in your brain and you're looking at all of them at the same time. And it's also that moment of literally just like Xing them all out. Or it's like choosing the one thing you're going to work on, or it's slowly working through all the tabs. And I feel like it's kind of like, you know, that first full moon was in this like, I'm authentic, I'm me, I'm going out on my own, I'm going on the lam, I'm going on my road trip. And this one is kind of like, okay. And as I was saying, it's like, before you have the chance to feel lonely, before you have the chance to think it was a bad idea. And this is like, you've been on that journey for so long. Are you going to continue with it? Does it feel authentic? Or like, are you just going to like cut it off and try again? But it's with Jupiter. So there's something where I think at that full moon, we're very primed for like the choice we make at that full moon can feel like inspired in this way, whatever it is. If you,
right.
I don't know.
I mean, there's, seems like in what you're saying, there's like, or this like, there's this like a letting go. It's like either you let go of the attachment to like figuring out the problem and understanding it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or you let go of the need to figure it out quickly. You decide, right? It's like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And you can like know what it is, or you can like actually do something with it, but you can't have both.
Totally. Totally. Which I feel like is one of the sort of Aquarian you know, blessings and curses, is that like the Aquarius wants to like know everything, wants to like experiment and contain and consume everything and like get to the bottom of it. And it's not even like about like closure or finishing. It's just like wanting to see the whole picture, which will only ever get bigger. And obviously that full moon with Jupiter is maybe also like being like, yes, there is so much information, but I do think having those two full moons is just like this really clear thing of like, whatever that Aquarius part of your chart is, it's like you've chosen to experiment and then you've maybe played with it in the Leo part of your chart all month. And then this second full moon is like, okay, like now I have to just like deal with the choices I've made and like cut things off and like make and do my edits, basically. Yeah, as you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. You just like find a good stopping place and then you like write your artist statement.
Yeah.
It's gonna make it all make sense.
Yeah, because I do think that's like an Aquarius thing too. It's like you have all the tabs open, you want to know everything, but then someone's like, do it. And you're like, fine, okay, here it is. It's delivered and clear. And I said all I needed to say in this moment. I did the assignment, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was meaningful about the assignment turns out to be this like really Leonine, like this was my experience of the assignment, but like, right. Yeah. I submitted it in this Aquarian way of like, now take it out of my hands and right, like, at least in my experience of my Aquarius, it's like, I did the Leo thing, like, now it's yours. I don't care what you think.
Yeah. Totally. Because you have to just like stop. You're like, I said what I said. And that's the truth.
I don't remember what I said. I don't know if I stand by it. I don't know if I agree with it. But I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can always open the tabs back up. And
in Virgo season.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which loves all the tabs. But in Virgo season, you can sort all of them into spreadsheets and then, you know, obsess over Microsoft Excel and organizing and reorganizing.
Exactly. Many Google Drive folders.
Many Google Drive folders. Well,
so that was Leo season.
That was Leo season. Oh my goodness. So fun. So fun to do some astro drama with the astro drama.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And then you are also doing a workshop on that second full moon.
Second full moon.
So do you want to say anything about that? Your workshop on brevity?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I haven't fully wrapped my head around how I want to tailor it to be for like just the one off of that full moon, but I feel like it's gonna be kind of a astro, we're going to talk about the astro, talk about what's going on, but I want it to be like a reflective period of like, let's talk about like the month we just had and like what really happened at that first full moon and how can we like distill that? How can we break that down into 100 words? How can we break down what our journey was in the middle into 100 words? How can we sort of, I think it will be a good exercise in being like, let's get all the ideas out and like talk about our experiences and then get into just like how to make it into something brief.
Right. Right. How to Marie Kondo our own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, all the info for that will be on our Instagrams and on my website. So if you guys are interested in that. Thank you so much, Jaime, for hanging out and spitballing about Leo season with me.
No problem. It was fun.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. I hope you have a good Leo season, and I will catch you later. Bye.
Bye.